This episode may contain content of a graphic nature. Listener discretion is advised.
Thanks for joining us today on another episode of Body to Burial. I'm Mariah.
And I'm Nikki.
We're just two regular true crime junkies who decided it was time to see crime from a new perspective. This is Body to Burial. Well, how's it going over there? What are you doing?
Trying to figure out how to do a calendar.
Gotta love technology. Mm-hmm. I don't think I told you this when we talked earlier, but I'm like living in mom hell at the moment because my dishwasher broke this week. And wait for it, my washing machine broke this week. So I literally have dishes piled everywhere and laundry in my kitchen, on the floor, in my bathroom, everywhere.
I would rather live without the dishwasher than a washing machine.
Thank you. It is absurd. And then so I'm trying to find a washer. And then, because of everything that's going on in the world right now, the delivery times are problematic.
That sucks.
So we are talking with Ashley, who is a Firearms Examiner.
Ooh.
Right?
That's interesting. What is that?
Super excited. So, I just have my CSI kind of education around that job. So I'm hoping she can really help us iron it out. But I'm pretty sure that's the individual that does the examining in the lab. Like what gun was used, where was it shot from, what angle, point of entry, exit, maybe potentially. I'm not totally sure, but I'm excited to talk to her and really understand what it is that she does and what her limitations are.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if she goes to crime scenes or not, or if she strictly works in a lab. I don't know. And then sidebar, I would like to talk to her about the Alec Baldwin incident.
Okay, yes.
Because from what I understand, he is claiming that he never pulled the trigger, that he pulled down on the hammer, which I don't think should ever allow for a gun to go off when he released his finger off of that. I don't know.
Don't you have to pull the trigger?
Right. That's what So I'd like to talk to her about what she thinks in that situation, because how does this stuff happen? That gun should have been checked. It said it was a cold gun. A lot of actors themselves say that they personally check the guns again before they ever interact with it on the set, and Alec didn't do that. But he's not technically required to per se, but then he's also a producer. So maybe you are there's a lot of weird legalities and different layers to this problem, I think. But obviously that's not something that you and I can fix or even attempt to understand. But I am curious to talk to Ashley and see what she thinks. And because she knows, handguns fairly intimately, what does she think potentially went wrong there? And what would have caused it to go off?
Yeah. Okay, we just went to Oatman. It's this little ghost town in Arizona, and they have this bank robbery show where you go, everybody goes around in the, it's by the hotel, bank, whatever, and they do this fake bank robbery thing. And then they have a shootout. And then my friend that we were with, when they started shooting, she goes and running off, and I was like, what's happening? She's like, this is a little too soon after the Alec Baldwin thing, and I didn't even really think about it, but I'm like, okay, we're standing behind these two dudes who, I would assume it's blanks, but then Ryder's right behind one of the guys that's pretending to be shot by the bank robber. And then so I kind of shoot him off to the side because I figured, if it's not a blank, then at least it would get me before it gets him. But I never really thought about it before until obviously recently because it's all over the news. But yeah, I get a little nervous with these, I guess, prop fake guns, blanks. But then how do real bullets get in the mix of a prop one? You know what I mean?
Right. Like they should have never, from what I understand. And again, like this is so different than what we're talking about. But from what I understand, they had taken those guns out and were shooting them like offset, like for fun, recreationally, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows how it got worked back in and why it wasn't checked and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's got to be,
Like,
I'm
wouldn't you
assuming
think
some
that
sort of like chain of custody and like some sort of protocol that wasn't followed, you know?
Yeah. Wouldn't you think that like the dummy ones would be a completely different color, like blue or green, or you know what I mean? Like the shells.
No,
So then you know exactly like what's like the whole shell would be a color. So then
something
you know
different.
it's like a dummy
Yeah.
one.
But I mean, I'm assuming that they didn't even open, I guess that's what, the barrel? No, that's not the barrel. Is it the barrel?
No, the barrels, I think, like where it comes out of. I think it's the shoot.
And this is how extensive our knowledge is, folks.
Ryan's gonna die. It's like the thing where the 6 bullets go and then you and it rolls.
Yeah.
What the hell is that called? The chamber?
That sounds right.
Okay, let me look this up. Let me see.
You sound like an expert to me.
I think, is it the chamber? What is the round thing that
Oh my God. Lord help us.
bullets in? Let me see. I'm looking at an image here. The cylinder.
Oh.
It's called, and a 6-shooter gun. It's a cylinder.
See, so then I guess it depends on what type of gun it was, which that I'm afraid I don't know.
The barrel is the long part.
The long part. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, that's what it is. There we go.
Ashley will be interesting because obviously she's going to be able to talk to us about how they use like bullets and like shell casings and how that is used as evidence, you know?
Yeah, that's what I always wondered. Like, how do they know? Does every bullet have like an identification thing on it?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, obviously, there's just like the initial size of the bullet, right? Like you can pick up a shell and you'll know it's a 22 or what have you. But I'm not sure how they match it back to like a specific, like your gun. Like this bullet came out of Nikki's gun that Nikki owned. Like, I don't know if your gun makes its own sort of like imprint somehow.
I wonder if they could trace it back to like maybe there's an identification thing on there. I'd be curious to know if that would be like a serial number and like you bought it at Walmart and that package, like how they do that.
How they trace it back. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's like I have heard, I don't know if this is factual because again, I will publicly admit my knowledge of guns is very, 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 very limited.
Mm-hmm.
But I have heard that like the shell casings all get like unique scratches or grooves or dents. But I don't know if that's like an intentional marking or if that's even true at all. Like I said, I don't really know. So I think it would be interesting. I think it's interesting to understand how they can link that all and how that
100%.
plays into effect as like hard factual evidence, you know, that can tie a weapon to a crime scene, which maybe potentially could tie an individual. I don't know. All right. We got to call Miss Ashley. So I'm going to get her on the phone.
Okay.
Hello.
Hey, Ashley, it's Mariah.
Hi, Mariah. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you.
Hold on. I'm just going to merge my call really quick. Nikki, are you there?
Yep.
Okay. Ashley, are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
Awesome. We did it. Thanks so much for chatting with us today. It's so nice to meet you. Ashley, why don't you kick us off? Introduce yourself. Tell us your name, who you are, and what your job title is.
Yes, I'm Ashley Rachel. I'm a firearms examiner. Currently in between jobs, but I spent 6 years at the Department of Forensic Sciences in Washington, D.C.
Amazing. So, Firearms Examiner, what does that mean? Like, Nikki and I were talking about this before you got on the line because she was like, okay, so like, what are we going to talk to her about? Like, what is that? And I was like, well, from like my CSI knowledge, I don't really know. Like, does that mean that you're working in a lab? Does that mean that you go to crime scenes? Like, what does that mean? What is your job?
Great. Yeah, great question. And I think it may vary a little bit depending on the lab that the person works in. For me, I do work in the lab. I'm 100% in the lab. I don't go to crime scenes at all. I primarily spend most of my job either on a microscope or typing a report and doing worksheets on a computer. And that's where I'll compare cartridge cases or bullets or projectiles. I'll compare them side by side, and then my primary goal is determine if they were fired from a particular firearm. That's my main duty. I have performed like serial number restorations before. We test fire and function test any firearms submitted, so that's when we're shooting the firearms in a water tank. And then we're performing other functions with the firearm, such as trigger pull and barrel length. But primarily, I'm on the microscope looking at these bullets and projectiles or cartridge cases.
Walk me through it. So, like, you show up to work, and what do you have? Like, what comes across your desk that you're going to be sticking under a microscope? Like, you had said that it could be like projectiles or bullets. Like, what do you see most frequently? So it comes in from like an evidence response team, or who shuffles it to your desk?
Right. So first, I guess it might be easier if I walk you through kind of like the general process at the lab.
I'd love that.
Any firearm submitted from a crime in Washington, D.C., for example, we would test fire it. So sometimes labs have technicians that do that. Sometimes examiners do that. But that process is receiving the firearm from a central repository. So for us, we had a central evidence unit. So all the evidence was filtered through that unit. So the first part would be to test fire the firearm if we had the firearm. So the firearm gets test fired into a water tank. Nothing special about the water, just regular water. And the only reason that we test fire into the water is to preserve the bullet. So the water will slow down the bullet so that it doesn't come into contact with anything that could damage the bullet. And then we also get an evidence cartridge case from that firearm as well. So basically, we're collecting a sample from that firearm that can then be compared to evidence from a crime scene. And then the second part is we enter those cartridge cases into a system called NIBIN, which I'm sure we'll talk about more in detail later. But NIBIN is the National Integrated Ballistics Information Network. And basically, that just is a repository for all the cartridge cases from all of the crimes, and it'll run scans or searches on those cartridge cases to see if they're linked to any other crimes. So if it's a homicide and it's the next one that needs to be worked, there could be firearms submitted for that case. There could be cartridge cases. There could be bullets, fragments. Anything firearms related will kind of all be married up into one big evidence bag, or if it's a big case, some sort of evidence bin. And I'll walk to this locker and I'll retrieve the evidence from that locker. And now I'm ready to do the examiner portion of the case. So I'll do trigger pull on the firearm. I'll ensure all of the safety mechanisms are functional. I'll do a safety or function test of the firearm. And then I should already have those representative samples from that firearm from the test fire process. So I have a set of bullets and a set of cartridge cases from that gun already. And now I can compare that to the evidence submitted in the case. So if we were talking about cartridge cases first, I'll group those into class characteristics. So class characteristics could be the caliber of the firearm. So for example, a 9mm Luger and a 40 Smith & Wesson. Those are two different calibers. So I wouldn't compare those cartridge cases on the microscope because I already know they were fired from two different firearms. So I'll kind of group them by class characteristics. And then when I have those different groups, that's when I'll put them on the microscope to compare them side by side. And this is when I'm looking at the unique imperfections of the manufacturing marks on the firearm that were transferred to the cartridge case during the firing process. So this is what makes the firearm unique.
Okay, because that's a question that Nikki and I were talking about back and forth, where I told her I wasn't sure if it was an accurate thing that I had heard, but I had heard that there was some sort of markings that usually ended up on like casings or indentations. So those are intentional and they are specific to one firearm only.
Correct. The individual characteristics are characteristics of one firearm only. So I'll take a step back. So there are class characteristics and individual characteristics.
Okay.
So class characteristics are determined by the firearms manufacturer, and they're held by a certain group of firearms, typically like that make and model. So if we're talking about bullets, for example, let's switch gears a little bit. If we're talking about bullets, a firearm manufacturer has determined what caliber they want that to be able to be fired out of a specific firearm. So caliber is a class characteristic. Another characteristic is if the bullet is going to rotate down the barrel to the left or to the right, so clockwise or counterclockwise. That's determined by the manufacturer because the barrel has grooves, lands and grooves cut out in the barrel, and that imparts a spin on the projectile, which makes it more accurate. So that direction of spin is determined by the manufacturer, and that can rotate to the left and to the right. Another class characteristic of bullets is the number of lands and grooves in the barrel. So as I said, the manufacturer will cut out lands and grooves in the barrel to kind of impart the spin on it. The number of lands and grooves that manufacturer has decided to cut into that barrel is individual to that manufacturer. So you could have 6 lands and grooves and the bullet can rotate to the right, and that would narrow it down to a certain subclass of a certain group of firearms. So if I have a group of bullets that all have the same class characteristic, I would then put them on the microscope to look at the individual characteristics. And that's what you were speaking to when you said that they're unique to one firearm and one firearm only. Say, for example, let's go back to the bullets and the barrel. So the barrel is a very strong metal, but the tools making that barrel have to be of an even stronger material because they're physically cutting that metal. So when the machine goes through the barrel to make those lands and grooves, to make those cuts, they're changing the barrel microscopically. So the little flakes of metal that get shaved away during this process, the tool is changing, and then they're creating the microscopic marks and imperfections on that barrel. And then when the bullet goes down the barrel, those unique imperfect marks are being transferred from the barrel to the bullet.
This is neat. I didn't even know that this was so like intricate of a job, really. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know. I just thought it was like what you see in the movies where it's like, you know, you slap the bullet on someone's desk and then they're like, it's from this guy's gun. And then the case is solved, you know?
Yeah, it's actually pretty crazy because it's a 2-year training program to be a firearms examiner. You have to understand how the firearms are manufactured, so you understand the unique marks that could be present on the firearm. Then you have to understand the manufacturing of ammunition, and then you have to cover the actual comparison parts on the microscope. And then a majority of the training is how to testify in court and kind of how to explain your job to a layperson, since those are the people that need to believe you and need to understand what you're talking about when you're on the stand. So it takes an average of at least 2 years to complete the training.
Wow. Yeah. So every gun has like I guess like a thumbprint, like their own thumbprint.
Yes, exactly. And it could be in different parts of the firearm depending on the evidence that you're looking at.
So let's just say you have like a casing and they're just like, this is all we were able to retrieve from the crime scene. What all can we learn from just a casing?
So if it's just a single cartridge case, you can learn the class characteristics of that. So you can know the caliber of firearm. You can look at the firing pin impression shape. So the firing pin of the firearm is unique as well.
Okay.
So the shape of that firing pin impression would be imparted on the cartridge case. So you can have hemispherical firing pin impressions. You can have elliptical firing pin impressions, which are more of a rectangular shape. The other thing that you could learn from a cartridge case is how the breech face was manufactured. So the breech face is the area where the firing pin aperture, or the hole from which the firing pin protrudes from, that's the breech face of the firearm, and the cartridge case is going to slam up against that breech face. So any marks from the breech face or the firing pin are going to be transplanted onto the cartridge case.
That's interesting. I just watched this thing on Netflix, The Night Stalker. I was watching that documentary on Netflix, and they were saying that he had these like a red tipped bullet or whatever, and that's how they can link him to different other crimes and other, like in up north and other things, because it was a little more specific, like they're used from the same person.
So I don't think I'm specific. I don't know if I don't know the case you're speaking of specifically, but I do know that there are certain bullets out there made by Hornady that have like a red plastic tip in the bullet. And that could be a helpful, if you found those red tips, it helps the bullet expand a little bit better. So if you were to find those red tips at multiple crime scenes, that wouldn't be an indication at all that they were committed by necessarily the same person, because a lot of those bullets exist out there and, the manufacturer makes them that way. I mean, it could definitely help you in terms of oh, hey, these cases may be linked. Let's compare the bullets. But a lot of different firearms can fire that particular ammunition, but it could give an indication to the investigator as to, hey, maybe these are linked, but you would still need the firearms examiner to look at the evidence under the microscope, because that red tip is another, like we talked about, that could be a class characteristic of that ammunition, because a lot of bullets manufactured would have that.
Can you link the bullet back to where potentially the person bought it, or that's just it's not that specific?
It's typically not that specific if you just have the cartridge case. If you had this physical box of ammunition that had maybe the lot number on it, that might be different. You might be able to search that lot number, get in contact with the cartridge manufacturer. But if you don't have that information and you just have the bullet or just have the cartridge case, you wouldn't be able to link it back to a store. And
the gun itself has a serial number on it, right? And that's how you would link it back to a person who has it registered?
Correct. Yes. I mean, if they purchased it legally and they sold it, and they sold it and kept track of all that stuff, yes, you could potentially link the firearm back to the seller and or the last registered owner. That's correct.
Ashley, you mentioned, and since Nikki talked about it, how there is the serial numbers on the actual guns. You had mentioned that you've done some serial number restoration. What does that look like? How are you able to kind of restore that serial number that they've either tried to scratch off or damage?
Yes. So usually when someone tries to obliterate a serial number or remove it from the firearm, they're, like you said, gouging or scratching the surface of that serial number. So typically from the naked eye, you think, oh, yep, no, they've completely obliterated the serial number. There's no way of knowing what the serial number is. But we can actually apply chemicals to that serial number to restore it. So you can kind of think of if you had like a big, thick notebook and you're pressing really hard and you're writing someone a note, and then you flip the page, like you can sometimes still see the impress marks underneath that second sheet of paper, even though the pen didn't go through that. It's kind of the same thing with a serial number. So when the manufacturer applies that serial number, it's actually going down multiple layers into the metal. And when they obliterate it, they're just scratching that top surface of the metal. So when we apply the chemicals, it's kind of deteriorating the top layer almost, or removing those scratches and allowing us to see deeper layers into the metal, where then that's where we can still see the original serial number that was applied by the manufacturer.
That is crazy. And that's all something that, like, I mean, obviously you need the gun for, and then that's
Correct.
when you would like track it back to whoever was the registered owner. But what happens if, say, like someone stole it from them or whatever, then it's just like you would never figure out who really scratched it off and who really used it. And it's just kind of a cold case sort of a thing.
Well, I think that's where like the detective work comes in, right? It's like figuring out like, okay, that gun belonged to Bob, but Bob said it went missing and was stolen from here. Like, you know, I think that's where like all that.
Absolutely. And that's something that we never hear anything about. Typically, they work closely more so with the ATF when it comes to tracing the firearms. That's not something that individual labs get involved with. So the detective would have to work with some other agency to kind of get information about that as well.
How frustrating that would be for you, because I would be curious. Like each thing that comes across my little microscope, I would be like, okay, well, what's the conclusion? You know?
Right. Right. And I think, you know, and sometimes I really believe there are some cases that I work as a firearms examiner that may have already been solved, honestly. Like maybe they didn't need my report. Maybe they captured it all on video, or maybe they used DNA. But by the time I get to the case, you know, I'm still working it and I have no idea that someone's already, you know, sitting behind bars for that murder. Like, I don't know any of that.
Oh, that's so I would be like dying. Like, can I just get a little recap of each little case file? That would drive me crazy.
Right. Absolutely. Yes.
I'd be bummed.
Yeah.
I need a little more action than that. How long are you spending on that? Like, how long are you spending on like a bullet or a case? Is that like a week-long thing or a day thing?
It definitely depends on how much evidence is recovered, for sure. So if there's, you know, we've worked cases where there's hundreds of pieces of evidence, and, you know, that can take a lot of time. But I would say the average case would probably take, at least in my experience, would take about 3 to 4 days, maybe a week. But again, you know, there are I've also heard of cases that have taken 3 months just from the Firearms Examiner perspective because of the amount of evidence. And a lot of that is like the report writing aspect of it as well, and the worksheets. So it's more of like the administrative part, which I think is another misconception, you know, that it's all fun and games and that forensics is so cool and it's all like I'm just sitting on the microscope and shooting guns all day. And it's
Literally,
like,
yeah.
you know.
Like I picture you like Annie Oakley, just like shooting guns into water.
Yeah. I wish that was a majority of it, but not always.
One of the things that you always see when you're, you know, watching CSI and stuff is that they're always talking about the gunpowder residue, and they have their little powder brush and they're like going over the firearms and stuff. Is that something that is viable? Is that something that you handle in your lab?
So there's with the powder, I just wanted to clarify. So sometimes they'll use fingerprint powder on the firearm to determine if there's fingerprints. So that's where on the CSI and stuff, if you see someone taking a brush, like a physical like fingerprint brush over the firearm, they're probably looking for fingerprints on that firearm. And our lab does that, but it's done by a different unit than myself. It'll go through the fingerprint processing before it gets to the firearms examination unit, as well as swabbing for DNA. So if they're swabbing the firearm with a Q-tip, that's typically them trying to collect like skin cells for DNA analysis. The gunshot residue aspect is kind of what particles are deposited during the actual firing of the firearm. So that's when sometimes you'll see on CSI, they'll swab someone's hand with a Q-tip, or they'll test clothing for gunshot residue. Our lab and our agency, we don't do any of the testing with like swabbing suspects or shooters to determine if they have gunshot residue on their hand. We don't come into contact with the suspect.
How did you get into that? Like, what made you like, because I'm looking at your picture with the microscope and I'm like, she's so cute. How did
that's
you
so funny.
get into like firearms?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a longer answer if I take you all the way back. So since third grade, I knew I wanted to do something with science. I just had an awesome third grade teacher that was obsessed with science and the outdoors, and I'm like, I'm definitely going to do a career in science. And I think that was the first Christmas I got a toy microscope that I had wanted. So I'm 33 years old, so I was definitely a product of the CSI effect. So I would watch it all the time. I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. It's science. I get to help people. I was like, that's what I want to do. And my first job was actually in a lab where we processed IEDs from overseas to develop the fingerprints. And we had a photography unit that would take pictures of the fingerprints and hopefully, put them on, no-fly lists and stuff like that. And I loved it. I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm still doing forensic science. I'm doing exactly what I wanted to do. And then I got a job at the Department of Forensic Sciences in Washington, D.C., in their fingerprint unit, obviously based on my background and everything. And then so when the position opened up in the firearms examination unit, I was kind of like, ooh, I don't know anything about guns. The cool thing is you'll learn and gain skills in one area of forensics that you can definitely transfer to other careers, which is super cool.
Yeah. I mean, if I could turn back time and go back to go to school and change a different path, I would want to do crime scene investigation, because I'm like, oh, I could do that. But then I didn't know there was that much stuff involved with crime scene investigation. I thought that I was going to bring the yellow tape and right. And then now I do hair and makeup. So, but in my head, I would turn back time and be crime scene investigation. And you just painted it so different than what was in my head.
Well, I mean, even for me, knowing I wanted to do forensics, if you told me as I was watching CSI that I'm going to be a firearms examiner, I'm just going to look at bullets and cartridge cases all day, I'd be like, no, I'm going to be that person on TV right there that does all the things. And it's just okay, yeah, no.
Yeah, with the windbreaker that says CSI.
Yep.
So I have to ask, Ashley, when you go to work, do you have your white lab coat and your safety goggles?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I could literally wear whatever I want as long as I had closed-toe shoes on. Yeah, just wear normal clothes every day. 99% of my job is in my little cubicle with my microscope, jeans and a t-shirt.
What about and this is probably not your department, but I would wonder what department it is a bow and arrow as a weapon.
Ooh.
Yeah.
What? Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've actually stumped me. I've actually never got that question before. That's so funny.
Yeah, I want, because, well, we go to the desert and like ride motorcycles and stuff. And I bought a bow and arrow. It's like this like little Sue that like has like these like soft tips. And I think I'm Katniss from, Hunger Games.
Yeah.
And I always
that's
wonder
awesome.
like what would happen. Like, because I mean, I'm not like a bow and arrow person. I'm just shooting a little bow and arrow. But that was like when you do bullets, I was thinking like, well, what happens if it's like a bow and arrow? And who would
Right.
like check that out?
Oh, yeah. I mean, not to speculate, but to, put something out there. I mean, I think it would mostly be the medical examiner, I think, in terms of like the wound, like how the wound was cut. I mean, if you're having a medical examiner on your show, I think you should ask them.
Ask every single guest now, do you know who will examine the bow and arrow?
Because, besides like testing it for blood and DNA, the actual arrow, I mean, you don't have anything to compare that arrow back to, I guess.
There's no arrow analysts out there.
Maybe you just invented a new department, Nikki.
I think I did. I mean, I don't think it's really happening nowadays with bow and arrows, but I was just picturing myself in the desert with my little Sue and like, what would would happen?
Oh, that's too funny. Too funny.
How much information do you get? Like when you go to collect like your evidence that you're going to be going through and examining, do you have any background of like where that came from, or like this was a double homicide, or
right,
or do you literally just pick up a bag and get to work with like no backstory?
Yes, typically I'm just picking up a bag and getting to work. With having so few examiners in Washington, D.C. and, having a lot of cases, we primarily were just working homicides at that point. So generally speaking, I knew I was picking up a homicide case to work on. But other than that, I wouldn't have any details of the case. I would just be, just looking at the evidence and doing my analysis and issuing my report. I don't know like the number of, victims or the number of suspects or anything like that, other than, probably having an inclination, that it was a homicide. I wouldn't have any other information.
Do you ever because for me, because I'm like just a curious person by nature and I'm like a dog with bone, like I feel like I would be laying in bed being like, okay, I'm going to Google, there must have been a homicide, I would be trying to figure out like on my own time, like where exactly these things came from. Like, do you ever feel like a compulsive need to like get more information, or do you just not even really think about it?
Personally, no, I don't. I don't think about it. And I think it's just kind of, going to work every day and just, doing the same thing. I mean, if I had to do that, I would be doing that multiple times a week, because going into work and doing a homicide, and sometimes by the time we would get to a case, it'd be weeks or, we have a backlog. So it could be weeks or months later that we would finally start working on this case that, that has already happened. So yeah, I actually don't kind of feel the need to search through stuff like that. And I actually, personally, I just don't watch the news because of how depressing it is. So, I mean, I'm sure it's different for each person, but.
So do you feel like your job is I hate to phrase it this way, but almost like a 9 to 5 where when you're done, you can clock out and separate? Or do you feel like there are aspects that you bring home with you?
I personally, for me, I have a really good work-life balance. So for me, it is more easy to kind of check out at the end of the day. I don't want to sound heartless, kind of. I feel like I'm still love my job. I'm glad I'm helping people, and I know that I am bringing justice to people. But because it's kind of I'm just looking at the evidence, it's not as hard for me to be work and then home kind of mindset.
Is it weird when you go on, when you have to testify in court to see the person that's attached to the bullet or the gun, or, you know what I mean? Do you ever, is that weird?
Honestly, I think a lot of people will be surprised by this, but in my 6 years of working in the firearms examination unit, I have never testified in court.
Really?
Which is crazy. It's completely it's nuts. But in Washington D.C., they'll actually stipulate to your report a lot of the times, and so many people take a plea deal. So I've never had the opportunity to testify on the stand. I've had like witness conferences with detectives where the detectives will come in and we'll sit down and they'll want to understand my report and my conclusions, and I'll walk them through my analysis and how I came to my conclusions, and we'll look through my case file. But I've always wanted to, I have so much training in how to testify, it's like all this training is being wasted. But I actually have never had the opportunity to testify in court.
That's crazy.
What would you say, like, if you were going in to testify, and you were like able to address the jury like openly and freely? Because obviously you can tell Nikki and I don't really have like an understanding of firearms and firearms forensics. So, but these individuals are going to be the ones that are making the decision if this evidence is substantial enough. What would you say to them to help them understand that it is a science that is very, definitive, I guess? Like it's very black and white.
I think it's important for them to know how we are able to come to our conclusions. And I would have to walk them through, how a firearm's manufactured and how those marks are left on the firearm. And then how those unique marks are transferred from the firearm to the ammunition components.
What happened? Like when your friends, or people that you meet, and they're like, "What do you do for work?" Are they always like, "What?" When you tell them?
Yes. Yeah. Everyone thinks it's crazy cool. They can't believe it. And that's kind of always been like, my husband mostly uses it as an icebreaker when we meet someone new. He'll just like interject into random conversations like, "Oh, ask my wife what she does for a living." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing."
I love it.
But yeah, no, it's definitely, I love talking about it. I love my job, so it's really cool, and it is an easy way to break the ice. But yeah, everyone's like, "Oh, that's a real career? Like, I can't believe I've met someone that actually does that." And every time after I explain what I do, they'd be like, "Oh, like CSI," and I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I'll just say, yeah, it's just like that," just to kind of like save the conversation. I don't want to give them a 2-hour spiel of how it's not like CSI, so I'll just be like, "Yeah, it's exactly like that."
That's cool though.
So cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ashley, I did want to ask your opinion. Again, Nikki and I were talking about this before you joined us, but we were talking about the Alec Baldwin situation. And, maybe you can help me understand, because I'm confused with my, understanding. But, in his most recent interview that he sat down and talked through the incident, he had said that he basically had cocked the hammer and, moved his hand according to how the director had asked him to. And that when he was finished, he released the hammer back to like a normal position, and then the trigger goes off.
Mm-hmm.
That can happen? Like,
No,
I'm so
no.
confused how that, like, I'm like, what am I missing?
Yeah,
I guess.
this is hilarious because I didn't know like I said, I don't watch the news. So I didn't know anything about this Alec Baldwin situation until last night. My husband and I watched the Hulu ABC
Yes. Okay. Yes. That's what
document. I literally watched this last night, and that's the only reason. And my husband asked me like 12 million questions about it. So that's the only reason I feel comfortable even talking about this, because I literally just talked about this last night. I mean, and without the gun, I obviously can't say for certain, but no, it would be, unless there was something physically wrong with the firearm, it would be impossible for the firearm to go off without pulling the trigger. So the action that he's describing of how he cocked the hammer and let the hammer go in a normally functioning revolver, that would not happen. The firearm would not have discharged if that's the way he's describing it.
So, Nikki, you were right then. potentially there could be a malfunction with the firearm itself then.
Because I don't know guns at all. But I was like,
that's
well,
what
maybe
she had
like
said.
there's like something was wrong with it. But then I was thinking too, like the dummy, this is what I don't get is like the dummy bullets. Why aren't they a different color than like normal looking bullets? Like, wouldn't you know if one is a dummy bullet that's in there or like all blue or all purple or something?
Right. I mean, yeah. So to answer like kind of both of your questions. So the first part, yeah, I would agree that either he did pull the trigger and he's saying that he didn't, or there is a malfunction with the firearm. So the firearm is only intended to go off once the trigger is pulled, because there's a safety mechanism that's blocking that. A safety mechanism is blocking that firing pin or that hammer from engaging with the cartridge unless the trigger is pulled. So either that's broken.
Is there a way for them to, sorry to interrupt you, but is there a way for them to take that gun and do an analysis of it to see if there is it like that it was broken?
Correct. Yep. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay. A firearms examiner should be able to determine that. Yes. Yes. So yeah. So either he pulled the trigger, and he's saying that he didn't, or there was a physical malfunction with the safety of the firearm. So those would be, in my opinion, those would be the only two things that could have been wrong with that gun going off. And then to answer your other question about the dummy rounds that's very true. So there are a ton of different dummy rounds out there. We at our lab, we have a variety of them as well. So some of them are plastic and they're orange. Like the whole thing is orange. Everything, like the cartridge case is orange, the bullet is orange. Like you would have no doubt that that's a dummy round. So they do make those. And yes, in my opinion, you would want dummy rounds that were easily, noticeable as being dummy rounds. Like I said, I just watched this last night, which is funny. So the ones that they were showing, I was confused about that as well. Because at least from the video, I couldn't tell how those dummy rounds, I didn't zoom in or pause it in any way. But from that documentary, I couldn't see how those dummy rounds looked different than cartridge cases. So, maybe if I slowed it down or paused or zoomed in, I would see something. But the dummy rounds that I'm familiar with, you can physically tell that they're different.
Yeah, I was telling Mariah, we just went over Thanksgiving, we went to this, we stayed at our friend's house and then we drove up to this little town in Arizona, Oatman, where it's like this ghost town and they do this bank robbery thing. And then it's a shootout and like we are standing behind one of the robbers and my friend like walks off and I'm like, I didn't even think about it until the whole Alex Baldwin thing, but she's like, yeah, I'm getting a little nervous. Like what happens if those aren't dummies? Right. And I'm standing right behind the guy. And then I look down and look at my son and I was like, oh, he's like right behind the guy who it's just these two guys shooting at each other. And I was like, I'm getting a little nervous too.
Right. Yeah.
So I kind of
absolutely
shuffled to the side a little bit and then put him onto the other side because I'm like, if I'm gonna get some shrapnel, I guess it'll be me then like him.
Yeah, I mean, and there's no way to tell if a gun is loaded unless you physically look at it yourself. You know what I mean? So yeah, being a bystander or being, just someone standing there or a gun is pulled on you and you just see the firearm, it would be nearly impossible to tell, if it was loaded or not.
Yeah, because it like sounds this. I mean, it was loud too. I had never and the kids, we all jumped after he shot the first one, and I'm like, oh God, I'm getting a little nervous because it was a little scary. But then, yeah, so then I was like thinking, we're here just to watch some little shootout in the street, and I never would have thought twice about it if the Alec Baldwin thing wasn't going on, and I would have been like, oh, This is fun. I never thought that you can accidentally load it with live bullets and accidentally shoot someone. So yeah, I didn't know
That's crazy.
Yeah, you probably look at guns in movies and TV, how I look at hair and makeup, where I'm like, where I'm like, that's not real, or like, like different like makeup, or, my husband's always like, are they really bald? I'm like, no, that's a bald cap.
Oh, that's awesome. That's cool. Yeah, I bet you it is very similar. No, that's awesome.
That's funny.
Well, thank you for joining us, Ashley. It's been so good chatting with you and like learning more about your job and what you do. In closing, is there any takeaways for our listeners or anything that we haven't covered, words of wisdom that you want to share with us?
I think something that I always like to mention, as a takeaway is, for future jury members and things like that, we're just working the evidence. We're looking at the case. We're examining the evidence to the best of our abilities. We don't know if someone wants the answer to be, yes, these cartridge cases were fired from the same gun, or no, these cartridge cases weren't fired from this gun. We don't have any indication like what the end goal that someone might have in their head, or what the detective is trying to prove. All we have is the evidence. I'm just working the case from, the examiner's perspective and using, my training and experience to come to those conclusions.
Awesome. I love it. We are just going to ask you a series of just kind of fun questions, just like a few.
Okay.
The first one that I'll ask, we ask all of our guests, but what song would be the perfect theme song for your job?
Perfect theme song. I have no idea. I've never thought about this.
I literally just had one pop into my head. What was that one? Janie's got a gun. Who was saying that one?
That's good. Oh, wow. Yeah, sorry I don't have one for that. That's a funny one, but I cannot. Nothing even jumped into my head.
Isn't that an Aerosmith song, Nikki?
Yeah, I think it is. I'm like singing it in my head. Don't mind my voice. It sounds like an angel I know.
That's a great song.
Yes. For some reason, that just popped into my head.
You got one for her, Nikki?
Oh, let's see. If you were cast in a true crime series, who would you play?
I'm just going to go with old school Grissom. He's the one that got me excited to be a forensic scientist. And he was, at least back when I watched CSI, he was the coolest one of them all. And I was like, I want to be him.
Oh, I love that. All right, I got one. So what profession would you tell people you do if you don't want to spend the night talking about your job?
Honestly, this is probably not the answer you want to hear, but I would probably still tell them the same thing, just because I think it's super cool. But I would probably just simplify it to be like, I shoot guns all day, and then I look at the evidence under a microscope. I mean, I think I'd find a way to shorten it, but I love it so much, and I think it is super cool. So I think I would still tell people that I just shoot guns all day or something like that.
I love it. I love it.
What are your hobbies?
Yoga, working out. I like to run. And then I read in my free time.
Okay. What kind of books?
We both love to read.
I mean, fiction, but yeah, they're definitely, thriller, suspense, murder mystery kind of things.
Okay. No,
I'm going to throw this out there. I just started reading this book. It's super fun. I've literally read cover to cover in like a day and a half. The Inheritance Game. Go read it.
Ooh, okay.
It's super fun.
I haven't
It's a
read
series.
that one yet.
It's super
Okay.
easy. Like it's kind of like chill, but like fun and twisty. It's a great one.
Okay. I'm writing that down as we speak, actually. So I'm always looking for a new book. So that's awesome.
Okay, I've got one for you because I'm having dishwasher problems in my house right now. So I'll ask you, do your dishes get rinsed before being loaded into the dishwasher, or do you just stick your dishes right in?
I probably rinse them too much. Like at that point, I could probably just hand wash them, but I rinse them hardcore. Like they're like crystal clean by the time I put them in the dishwasher, but I still put them in the dishwasher.
Oh, that's the worst part. I'm like, that's why they're in the dishwasher. I just slap them in.
No, Ashley and I are on the same page about this one. Like the dishwasher is supposed to be like a sanitary rinse. Like you do not put all your gack in the dishwasher.
That's why it's in there.
I'll put the faucet on like the hardest, like, to rinse it off as best as I can. Like by the time I put it in the dishwasher, it doesn't even look like it's been eaten off.
No.
Perfect.
Mine is like
you can
caked
visit
on
my
the
house
cheese.
anytime. That's great.
Mine still has melted cheese that like the fork didn't pop off.
Are they clean when the dishwasher's done?
Yeah.
Shout out to your dishwasher, Nikki.
I have a Bosch one, but also that's when I do. That's when I do the dishes. My husband's he said I don't know how to wash dishes, so he does the dishwasher. So. I mean, maybe he takes them out and rinses it, and then they look like your guys's, but...
I can actually see him doing that probably. He's probably, oh, God, I can't believe she put this in here dirty. I'm going to rinse this.
Like, literally, my cereal still has Cheerios on the side of it, just, like, stuck because I didn't rinse it.
Oh, my God, so much anxiety.
Did I give you a good visual?
Yeah, no, yes, you did.
What would you be this is just a silly one too. What would you be embarrassed to admit that you hoard? Everyone hoards something.
I know, yeah.
Books?
No, I usually give them to my mom when I'm done. I probably keep too many like plastic bags from the grocery store. I'm totally going to use this someday. I mean, I know like almost everyone has like, a bag of other bags, but I probably have more than the normal person.
Yeah. I always feel like I paid 10 cents. And then I say that I'm going to like go.
Yeah, because we don't have to pay, Nikki, again. So we can like.
What?
We can just take as
What?
many as we want.
You don't have to pay for bags.
No.
Nope.
What?
That would probably really help my hoarding because I also would be really mad that I had to pay for a bag.
Well, yes, I was pissed when I had to pay 10 cents. My first 10 cents, I was like, what? And then you think that it would make me... I can't even tell you how many stupid like reusable bags that I've bought and thinking I'm going to take them in, and not one goes in with me. Not one.
Yeah.
So
that's something
every
I wish
time
I would
go,
do more, but I don't. But yeah, I wish I would take more reusable bags to help the environment. But yeah, you're right. They never make it into the store.
They would never make it out of my trunk.
No.
And then by the time I remembered, like, oh, they're in the trunk. Oh, fine. Just give me the plastic.
Yes. And then I pay the 10 cents every single time. And sometimes it equals to 90 cents. And then I'm pissed.
Yeah, that's not great.
Yes. I can't believe you guys don't pay. I thought this was like a nationwide thing.
No. That's a California thing.
Oh my God.
I think it actually is a thing in Washington, D.C. as well, but I live in Maryland, so it's not a thing here.
Oh my God. I had no clue. I thought everybody is paying 10 cents. And it sounds so stupid, but yeah, no. Okay. That's a little fun little thing I just learned.
Perfect. All right. Well, I don't have any more questions. Nikki, you have any final thoughts or questions for her?
No, I think I'm good. That was fun.
Cool.
Awesome,
We did
ladies. This was so good. You guys were excellent. This was so much fun. I
thank you.
enjoyed
Thank
this
you,
so
everyone.
much.
Thank you for educating us because we are very uneducated in this arena, so we appreciate it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all. And I mean, obviously, via email, or we could do this all again for all I care because I enjoyed it so much. But let me know if you guys have any, follow-ups. This was a blast.
Well, I texted my husband and told him that I was like, oh, we're talking to a firearms expert. And then he was like, well, I could have been a guest on this because he's all into it, loves all this stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
So yeah,
So
maybe
good.
we'll have a guest interview with him.
I think you should. I think you should.
Yeah. See how he does.
I love it.
All right. Well,
Awesome.
thank
Well,
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Okay, so what do you think?
Loved her. She's so cute. So easy to talk to.
She's so cute. She's adorable.
Yes.
100%. She's like one of those like Barbies that you're like, what?
I don't know what I was picturing as a firearms person, but I was not picturing her.
You can't judge a book by the cover. Like, there you go.
Did not expect it.
But holy crap, did I learn so much about her job. Like, clearly I was super uneducated. It's amazing to me what she can accomplish by not even leaving a lab.
I just didn't know that they went through such a process to get to her and then a process after her.
Yeah, there's a lot of people involved. It seems to pass through a lot of hands.
And I would be really frustrated that you never get like a conclusion to what you're working on. That would suck.
Oh my God. Like, the more that we're talking to these people, the part that literally nags my soul is that none of them ever get any like follow through on what happens. Because I couldn't imagine being the other person of this that like collected all the bullets and all the casings and then passed it to Ashley and then was like, okay, I'm all done.
Yeah.
I'd be
it's
like,
weird.
Ashley, what's up, girl? What'd you find?
Yes.
What do you think? Like,
Yeah.
there's no way I could just never like close the loop.
Like, give me a little juice. What's up?
But I guess that's why I don't do a job like that.
In my head, I thought that all those jobs were one person.
I mean, but she's right. Like in the shows, they make it think that it's like this little team that just like moves from point A to B to C together doing all these things. And that's not what's happening. Like, this team's working on backlogs from weeks ago. And this team's, like she said, she has stuff from months ago that may have already been solved, which is bonkers to me.
That's so crazy.
It really is. I think my biggest takeaway is if I'm going to, commit a crime, I'm going to do a bow and arrow. Because like they don't even have a department for that. So
Right? I'm not kidding. Because let me tell you, with my little Sue, when I'm shooting it in my head, I really think that I'm like Katniss. It never hits a
100%.
freaking target. That's just number one. But in my head, I just am like, okay, I can do this. And last time when we went to the desert, I brought like a pumpkin and I really thought that I was just going to be just smashing that thing with that arrow. And one of my arrows broke. So then, and I only have two. Okay.
oh no.
I only have two. One of the arrows was broken and the other one had like the little like feathery part that
Okay.
was like, it makes it like go like all sideways and like, so Christmas, I ordered a lot of arrows because I'm just going to be really perfecting my bow and arrow skills.
Your skills. Yeah. Seems like a great way to go.
Thank you.
And if anybody would like to start up a arrow forensic department, I think they should reach out to you.
So I could be a test shooter.
Yes.
That would be good.
Well, that was a good one. Until next week.
Until next week.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We do encourage you to follow us at Instagram at Body to Burial. Hit us up on Twitter at Body to Burial. And you guessed it, you can send us an email to hello@bodytoburial.com.
If you have any guest suggestions, just let us know. Please hit the subscribe button or follow button on whatever app you are listening to.
Thanks so much, guys. See you next time.